I came back to consciousness on a marble ballroom floor, lights spinning above me like broken stars. My ears rang, my mouth tasted like pennies. Somewhere close, glass clinked. A woman screamed, and my name echoed like it didn't belong to me anymore. When I turned my head, pain exploded. That's when I saw it. A heavy brass centerpiece rolling across the floor, slick with blood. My father stood frozen, chest heaving. 2 minutes earlier, I had been standing calm, refusing a single demand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. I just said no. And that one word unlocked hell. My name is Clara. I'm 30 years old and I work in construction. Not the glamorous kind people brag about at dinner parties. The kind where your hands stay rough no matter how much lotion you use. The kind where you measure twice, cut once, and if something goes wrong, there's no one to blame but yourself. People are often surprised when they hear that. I've learned to let that go. I don't build things to impress anyone. I build them because I like knowing something will still be standing long after I leave the room. That instinct came from my grandmother. She was the only person in my family who never treated hard work like a phase I'd eventually outgrow. When I was young, she'd sit at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching me sketch floor plans on napkins. She'd nod slow and say, "If you're going to build something, make sure it can hold weight." When she passed, she left me a small piece of land outside the city. Uneven ground, scrubby trees, the kind of place everyone else dismissed. My parents called it a headache. I saw a foundation. For years, I worked days and built nights and weekends. I learned where every wire ran, knew which floorboard creaked because I'd nailed it myself. When money ran tight, I ate cheap and kept building. When I got hurt, I taped myself up and finished the job. My family never visited the site, not once. To them, my real value was always measured against my younger sister, Melissa. She was softer, louder, always needed saving. My parents orbited around her like gravity demanded it. I learned early that being dependable meant being invisible. So when Melissa announced her wedding, everyone called it a celebration, a reason for the whole family to finally come together. I should have known better. Families like mine don't come together for joy. They come together when they want something. The venue was one of those downtown spaces that looks better in photos than it feels in real life. Tall ceilings, white linens, too many mirrors. Everything polished, everything expensive, everything designed to look perfect from the outside. I arrived alone and immediately felt it. That quiet shift in the room. The way people glanced at my hands and looked away a second too fast. I found my place card near the edge of the ballroom. Far enough from the head table that I couldn't see it clearly without leaning. Melissa floated through the room like she'd been born for it. My parents followed her everywhere, adjusting details, greeting guests, making sure everyone saw what they'd raised. No one introduced me as anything. When guests asked what I did, my mother smiled tightly and said, "Oh, Claire is very hands-on," like it was a personality quirk instead of a career. Dinner hadn't been served when my father appeared at my side. Richard didn't sit. He stood too close, one hand resting on the back of my chair like he was testing its stability. "Big night for the family," he said. My mother joined him moments later, smile already set. Elaine had that tone ready, the one that sounded friendly but wasn't. "We need to talk," she said. Just for a minute. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't mention my work. They went straight to it. "Melissa's starting a new chapter," my father said. "She needs stability." My mother nodded. "A home, something solid, and you already have one." I waited for the rest. "It's simple," she continued. "You transfer the house to her, just on paper, a symbolic thing. She and her fiancé will take care of it." My stomach tightened. I asked one question. "What happens to me?" They exchanged a look, the kind that said the answer didn't matter. "You're single," my father said. "You don't need all that space. You'll figure something else out." That was the moment something shifted inside me, quietly, permanently. They weren't asking. They were reallocating. I looked across the room at my sister laughing, my parents glowing beside her, and I understood the truth I'd spent years avoiding. To them, my house wasn't my life's work. It was a resource, and I was expected to hand it over without complaint. My father leaned closer, voice dropping. "You'll do the right thing." "You always do." My mother's eyes shone in that practiced way that looked like concern but felt like pressure. "Think about your sister. This is family. You don't want to be the one who ruins her day." The word ruins landed hard. I thought about the nights I'd slept in my car to save money. The splinters, the bruises, the quiet pride of locking my own front door for the first time. I looked back at them. "I'm not transferring my house," I said, steady, quiet, final. My mother's smile cracked. "Don't be difficult." My father's jaw tightened. "You're being selfish." "No," I said. "I'm being clear. You wouldn't even have that place without this family," he said. "Everything you have traces back to us." "The land came from Grandma," I said. "The house came from me." People nearby had started to notice. Chairs shifted. Conversations slowed. My mother's voice sharpened. "If you walk away from this, don't expect things to stay the same." I understood what she meant. Holidays, birthdays, the illusion of belonging. I stood up. "I'm not giving my home away," I said. "Not today, not ever." The silence that followed was absolute. I picked up my bag and turned to leave. I remember thinking how strange it was that no one tried to stop me. How calm I finally felt, choosing myself. I took 2 steps, then I heard movement behind me, fast, heavy. I turned just enough to see my father's face twist, something raw and furious breaking through the mask he wore in public. His hand closed around the brass centerpiece from the table. There was no warning, no shout, just the sound of metal cutting through air, and then everything went white. I came back in pieces, sound first, a sharp, uneven ringing that wouldn't stop. Then light, too bright. My body felt distant, floating somewhere just above the floor. Cold marble pressed against my cheek. My shoulder burned. When I tried to move, nausea surged so fast I had to freeze. Somewhere nearby, a woman screamed my name. Someone shouted for security. I tasted iron and knew, without touching my face, that I was bleeding. I turned my head an inch. The brass centerpiece lay on its side a few feet away, one curved edge smeared dark. It glinted under the ballroom lights, completely out of place on the floor, like a lie that had finally fallen over. My father was still standing, chest heaving, eyes wide, unfocused. For a split second, he looked almost confused. Then his gaze snapped to me, and whatever hesitation had been there vanished. "You don't walk away from me," he shouted. "You don't turn your back on your family." A shadow moved between us. "Enough!" The voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Daniel, Melissa's fiancé, stepped forward and placed himself directly in front of me. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't touch my father. He just stood there, shoulders squared, jaw tight, looking at Richard like he was something dangerous that needed to be contained. "Step away from her," Daniel said. My father scoffed. "This doesn't concern you." Daniel didn't move. "It does now." Security rushed in. One grabbed my father's arm, another radioed for help. My mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands, her face twisted not in fear for me, but in panic over the scene being made. As they lifted me onto a stretcher, the room blurred. Crystal lights streaked overhead. I caught a glimpse of Melissa standing frozen near the cake, hands over her mouth, eyes wide. Not with concern, with shock that everything was unraveling so publicly. The last thing I heard before the doors closed was Daniel's voice, clear, controlled. "Don't touch her." It sounded like a promise. By the time we reached the hospital, the adrenaline had burned off and left pain behind. A deep pulsing ache behind my eyes that refused to let go. They stitched the cut on my head and told me I had a concussion. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting cracks, trying not to think about what came next. The curtain rustled. I flinched. But it wasn't them. It was Daniel. He looked like he'd been through a storm. Jacket gone, shirt wrinkled, a faint smear of blood on one cuff. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at me like he needed to confirm I was real. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stepped in sooner." "You did enough," I told him. He pulled a chair close and sat, hands clasped, knuckles white. "There's something you need to know," he said. "Actually, there's a lot," he told me carefully. Over the past few weeks, things hadn't added up. Melissa had been vague about money. Bills appeared and disappeared. He'd hired someone to look into it quietly. What they found was bad. Credit balances stacked on top of each other. Missed payments. Debt shuffled around to keep it hidden. And the reason for the house transfer wasn't generosity or a new start. "They weren't asking you to help her," Daniel said, voice tight. "They were trying to use your property to make the debt disappear." I closed my eyes. "And your parents knew," he continued. "They'd been helping her move things around for months." Something inside me went very still. "I'm not marrying her," he said. "I ended it tonight." I opened my eyes and met his. There was anger there, and disappointment, and something else underneath. Relief, maybe, that the truth was finally out in the open. "You didn't cause this," he added. They did. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Someone had filmed the moment my father swung. Another clip caught Daniel stepping in. You couldn't hear every word, but you didn't need to. The image was enough. Security footage filled in the rest. By afternoon, I had a missed call from an officer asking if I wanted to make a statement. By evening, my phone was full of messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Some asked if I was okay. Others asked if I'd considered the consequences, as if telling the truth was the dangerous thing I'd done. My mother begged me to say it was an accident. My father's message was 4 words: "You pushed me to it." I didn't reply to either of them. Instead, I did the one thing I had never been allowed to do. I let professionals handle it. I gave my statement. I handed over the footage. I told the truth plainly, without embellishment, without apology. I didn't demand revenge. I just refused to lie. The investigation moved quickly. The evidence was clear. Witnesses were plentiful. The story my parents had always relied on, that things could be smoothed over if everyone just kept quiet, finally collapsed under the weight of what had actually happened. Weeks later, I sat in a courtroom, hands folded, listening as the facts were laid out one by one. The brass centerpiece entered into evidence. The videos played. The financial records referenced, not in dramatic detail, just enough to show motive and pattern. My father didn't look at me once. When the judge spoke, her words were calm and precise. She talked about accountability, about the difference between family and ownership, about how being a parent doesn't grant someone claim over another adult's life and choices. The ruling wasn't explosive. No gasps, no cheers, just consequences measured and documented. Somehow that felt more powerful than anything else could have. As we left the courthouse, Daniel caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a small nod, not celebratory, just respectful. And for the first time since that night, I felt my shoulders drop. The fight was over. The silence that followed was louder than anything that had come before. The weeks after the hearing passed quietly, in a way that felt unfamiliar but welcome. My father's world shrank fast. The identity he'd built around influence and appearances eroded quickly once the story was out. Doors stopped opening. Invitations stopped coming. My mother tried to hold things together with apologies that never quite reached accountability. Melissa retreated into a silence that said everything she couldn't. I focused on healing. The concussion faded slowly. Some mornings the light still hurt. Some nights the memory came back sharp and uninvited. But every day I woke up in my own house, the one I built. The one no one could take from me anymore. A friend checked in often. He never asked for details. He just showed up with groceries or tools or quiet company. One afternoon, standing on the back deck, he said, "You did the hardest part already. You stood your ground." The legal chapter wrapped up cleanly. No drama, no backroom negotiations. Just a paper trail, a decision, and a line drawn where one had never existed before. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the next demand. I wasn't bracing for the next disappointment. I was simply living inside a life that finally felt like mine. And that, I learned, is what real justice sounds like when all the noise finally fades. A year later, I sit on my back steps at dusk, watching the light settle into the walls I built with my own hands. The house is quiet. No guilt, no pressure, no conditions attached to existing. Just space to breathe. I didn't lose a family that night. I found my boundaries, and I learned that love doesn't ask you to disappear so someone else can stand taller. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you, share your story below. And subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.